Hey guys, welcome back. Joe Brunsman, insurance broker to the stars. I am joined by Danny Astin, the second best looking former naval officer that I know. And he is let me get this right, business lawyer and consultant. I know him as a super smart attorney that works with MSPs. And I thought it'd be cool to kick off the year with some of the changes I think that MSPs need to be thinking about as far as their particular contracts go. And so we got a couple topics here. Danny, thank you for joining me. Always appreciate it.
No, it's great. I'm thrilled to be here.
All right. So first topic, and we've spoken before, and I think it's always cool for everybody listening to say, it's like, okay, there's multiple ways that you can attack a problem. So obviously, like me as the insurance guy, I kind of have my lens I view the world, but then it's always nice to have another lens by which you view the world, because I think it's when great minds come together, you really just generally get the best possible solution to a problem. So, Danny, let's jump on into it. I'm going to pick your brain here. A couple things I wanted to talk about. So, I've been harping on MSPs for years that they should be contractually requiring clients to carry cyber insurance. And I think I've beat that horse. When I first put out that recommendation, I kind of got some kickback from the community, but now it's super common. So you're out there working on MSAs, SLAs, et cetera, for MSPs. You added an interesting twist to add to the contracts, and that's a notice of failure to pay their premium. They have to give notice to the MSP. Why is that a good idea?
Well, that's a good idea because if you're requiring cyber insurance and you think it's important, and it is, and I'm sure I've heard you say many, many times why it's important. But if it's important, then you certainly want to know when your client stops paying the premium, when they're in default. And
Hmm.
it's not uncommon for the insured through the insurance company, to provide notice to some third party that the premium or the premium has not been paid to the policy. It's about to lapse, or that it has lapsed.
Good, good. Okay. Now, what are your thoughts? I'll throw you a curveball here. So I'm kind of two minds here as far as the administrative burden that MSPs have. So, should MSPs, I get this question a lot. Hey, should we be getting copies of these policies, or would something like a certificate of insurance suffice to show proof of insurance, or do they need to do that at all? What are your thoughts there?
Well, I may be an outlier on this, but over the last 35 years, what I always recommend my clients do is they have someone that's in risk management. That's a Joe Brunsman. So look over the insurance policies. So the ordinary course, most people at best they'll get a certificate of insurance. Unfortunately, many don't. They should, at the very least. But I would go beyond a certificate of insurance, and I'd want a copy of the declarations page and the policy itself, because I would want to see. It's one thing to say I'll make it up, $1 million in coverage, for example, for something,
Mm.
cybersecurity claims. But unless you really know what the coverage and more importantly, the exclusions are, you don't really know whether it's worth the paper it's written on. As you know, Joe, there are less and less underwriters for cybersecurity these days, because of the rapid changes. The bad
Mm-hmm.
guys are always coming up with new ways to get in. Um, in my view, I'd get it all. And it's not hard these days with electronics. They can get a PDF of the policy, have their risk manager, whether it's internal to the company or outside, or their, at the very least, their insurance broker, take a look at it and see, so they can be well informed. Information is value. So as the entrepreneur, business owner, manager, CISO, whatever, you're going to want to know what are the exclusions of that cyber policy, so that you can get a sense of whether it's really going to be there for your customer. Because if your customer has insurance, things go a little bit easier when there are claims that arise. As you know, there's a lot of finger pointing. And if everybody's got insurance, it does make life easier on the balance sheet.
Yeah, and I would add to that, if MSPs were just a little more savvy about the various exclusions coming out in these cyber policies, they could really add a lot of value to their clients. So the easy example is critical vulnerability exclusion, right? So these new exclusions coming out that say, for example, hey, if you don't patch a vulnerability with a score of X or greater within so many number of days, there's going to be no coverage that's afforded. So that's something where I think, one, it's a great sales tool for the MSP, but also it just adds value to that relationship between the MSP and their client to
Right.
say, hey, you probably didn't know this because your insurance guy didn't read it, maybe you didn't read it, but here's this kind of wacky exclusion that could be really burdensome for you. Here's how we're helping you as an MSP, right, to stay compliant with what you have there. I think that would add a lot of value. Um,
Now
next,
you brought that value up because it's like analogous to the difference between your service and the Navy and mine. Over decades, things changed. When I first started out in the business, the trusted advisor, the person who knew everything about what the business was doing, what the owner was doing, was often the accountant. They were the first
yeah,
to know, last to know. Today, that trusted advisor, because the digital world is at the center of just about every business that you can think of, in everything that you do, all the communications, et cetera. So it's the MSP, the smart MSP who wants to grow, always thinking about scale, is going to be the one who's going to provide that critical advice that you mentioned and guidance as a value added to their customer. And that help is invaluable. It also builds and tightens the relationship. It creates more reliance, and it shows the for lack of a better phrase, it shows the customer that the MSP is not just a knob turner and
mhm.
somebody who's sophisticated and can help guide them in their business in areas where they're not necessarily savvy.
I agree. I agree. All right, next, let's talk about something that, and I'm glad that we're going to talk about this because this has been battling in my brain for a few years now. Limitation of liability for third-party claims, including software licensing vendors. So I know that like one of the big questions that MSPs always have is, what if I as an MSP don't do anything wrong? It's either the software vendor that the client is using, or it's one of the software vendors that I'm using that just kind of gets passed on to the client. It's like a Dropbox, Azure, AWS, something like that. Talk to me about kind of the limitation of liability that you think MSPs should be putting in their contracts moving forward.
Well, you have to, first of all, I have to say the MSP has to be conscious of the cost benefit analysis of the risk that they're taking. That goes with any business, but more so with the MSP, because depending on what the MRR is, you may be taking way more risk than you're getting in terms of revenue, and that your balance sheet in terms of asset value could support and cash flow could support if you wind up in a dispute. So with that said, part of the analysis is looking at where the potential downsides are. And as the MSP, every time there's a cyber breach, a data breach, a privacy breach, read the newspaper. Everyone points their finger at the folks that are managing the IT systems, managing other people's computers. So it's not unrealistic. In fact, it is very likely that the MSP is going to get caught up in a dispute, in a claim, in a lawsuit with the parties that are materially affected, mainly affected by whatever the problem is, because they were at the center of it. They're managing it. But it's also clear as a sales tool to explain to the customer, MSP explain to the customer, how could I be held liable for things I can't control? And the extreme example of one we all know, acts of God, force majeure, pandemic, or lightning
Mm-hmm.
strikes the facility where the data is being stored. Those are the extreme examples. But the other simple example is the employee, walks away, as you and I used to refer to as Seaman Snuffy, walks away from his desk, goes to lunch, leaves his computer on, and stick them right there with his password on it. And
Yep.
how's he going to be responsible for that? So, or they click on an email that they shouldn't have clicked on and open it up and expose the company and its data, its client's data, customer data, uh, to the dark web or to the hackers. Those are the kinds of things they shouldn't be liable for. So they should deal with that in the contracts. That's my mantra. This is yours is cybersecurity. My mantra is to pound the table and limit the liability so that it makes sense for the services that you're providing.
Yeah, I think that MSPs, in my experience, they have a misconception because they're very technically minded people, right? So a technical answer to some type of claim would be like, hey, I'm not responsible because of this laundry list of technical explanations. But I think MSPs have to start realizing, one, your first line of defense is going to be in these contracts. So if anybody's listening to this, please do not borrow your buddy's contract. I know that it's super common, and you are asking to just get shellacked by your own attorney, by your own insurance company, and by a judge if it gets that far. But also, like these are things that as the risks keep evolving, we can't just rely upon a very technical, computer centric type answer, right? It has to be something that, anybody's grandmother, I think, could understand. And so bringing it all the way back to the contract to say like, hey, I can't be responsible for something I don't even control, right? Like that's where, going back to kind of one of the first things we talked about, the client has to have cyber insurance and they should show proof of that to the MSP because, if somebody loses a lot of money, like you said, they're just going to go, hey, I'm the business owner. I don't understand technology. That's why I hired these guys. Well, I don't exactly know what happened, but I know that they're the tech folks. It was a tech problem. I lost a bunch of money. I'm going to sue these guys. So that's where I think if I could have one wish for the new year, it would be every MSP out there, update your contracts. Because some of these guys, I was just talking to a guy who has not updated his MSA in 7 years. And I was like, oh my God, has the world changed?
Well, we see potential clients coming through the door that have not renewed contracts in a very long time and just continued on provide the services. And we see a fair amount of MSPs who rarely use contracts. And so it is, I think you're right on that. You will get shellacked. The common phrase that you'll hear is that I have a good feeling about this client, and all I'll say is it's always okay until it's not okay. It's sort of like that scene in the movie Jerry Maguire where the guy says, I don't do contracts, but my word is my bond and it's stronger than oak. And no one remembers that handshake when they're having to put out money or their business stops because they don't have the use of their IT or their data or their customers' data is stolen or ransomed or both. And nobody remembers that conversation. You really do need a contract. It really is important and part of any mature business relationship. Whether you're selling cars or selling IT services, you need an agreement. That I agree with.
Yeah, and I just tell people, because I get that question all the time, like, how do I even broach this topic? I haven't had contracts or they haven't been signed in 5, 10 years, 20 years. Sometimes they've been working with the same company. What I tell them is, hey, just blame your insurance company because your insurance company, one, if you're going to get insurance, you need to have a contract, right? But two, they're going to crucify you if you don't. And everybody hates insurance companies. So just blame the insurance company. In the interim, get that contract in place, make sure it's up to date. But let's talk about AI real quick. So I've been recently doing a deep dive on this. The statistics are shockingly bad. Waiver of liability and indemnity, we're going to have to define those terms here in a second, for claims arising from customers or their customers' use of AI. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, so I saw the other day, I saw an article that said here are the top 10 apps to use for artificial intelligence, chat GPT and the like. And the problem with that is there's no question AI is here to stay. There's no question
Mhm.
it's a huge disruptor. We have no idea. Nobody can really even guess how much it's going to change what we all do and how it's going to impact what we all do. But my view is it's a good thing. It'll create greater efficiencies, and over time, the economy will restructure and businesses will restructure, and those efficiencies will translate to the bottom line. But right now we're so early, all you have to do is watch a podcast or read the newspaper, and very prominent people like Elon Musk and others are saying you have to be very cautious about this because, and it is open source. So a lot of it, but if you ask your cybersecurity vendors, they will tell you it's full of Swiss cheese. It's like Swiss cheese, full of holes. So before you download that and start using it, you probably ought to look at it very hard to see whether you've got protections or whether it creates greater risk. And another back to that trust factor and guidance factor. This is a huge opportunity for MSPs to bake into their services and their costs, their fees, advice for things like protocols. We all know it's very important for every business to have IT
Mhm.
protocol procedures in place and ongoing training for their employees. Well, this just got ratcheted up to Mars. The importance of making sure that your employees are not, it's not just a matter, it used to be how much time is being wasted doing online shopping and surfing. And now the big issue is going to be how much risk is being brought on because people are playing with ChatGPT or other artificial intelligence applications while they're at work. And so and the business owners are going to have to, and the people that work for them and manage these IT systems are going to have to help the owners put procedures and protocols in place and training to make sure that everybody understands there's a far greater risk now than there ever was because of the advent of artificial intelligence. So that's my thought on AI, is that I would be very cautious, make sure you know why you're using it, make sure you and your employees are well trained, and that you talk to your MSP to make sure that you understand how much risk you're taking and whether you have appropriate cybersecurity protections in place. And again, there's going to be insurance provisions that are going to deal with this. So people are going to have to look at the exclusions.
Yeah, I think when I was researching this, one of the dangers that I saw was it was something like 75% of professional services employees are using some type of AI on a daily basis for their job. And like if we go back to the Samsung breach, so to speak, which happened last year, a lot of people don't understand like, hey, when you put information into these AI systems, they're keeping that information and they're using that to train the system. So if you put a bunch of PII, PHI, PCI, corporate, trade secrets inside of that particular piece of AI, that could be gone forever. And you could lose your competitive advantage. The AI actually got breached. So now people are looking at what other people have posted in there. In the case of Samsung, they were putting confidential source code inside of AI to see if that code could be streamlined, and that stuff's gone forever. So yeah, I think that's very forward leaning on your part, and I think it's a good idea that MSPs start contemplating, hey, what type of risk and blowback could come to the MSP by their clients using this type of AI. And also, another conversation I was having with an MSP earlier today, actually, was this could be a really cool growth area for MSPs. So I could see moving forward that companies transferring a lot of money, there's going to be some type of technology that's going to be assessing a phone call to say, hey, is this an AI generated voice? Or training provided to employees where we've had the traditional security awareness training, right? Like, hey, don't click on the bad thing. Maybe the new type of training that's going to be added on, so an additional level of service would be, hey, here's how you use AI. Here are the dangers associated with AI, right? Don't input XYZ, or be very careful about how you're using it, what you're putting in there. I can see that being a cool kind of service add for the MSPs in the future.
There's no question. It's no different than the current packages they put together. What's going to be in your stack is the question in the future. What sort of applications are you going to make part of your package? The MSPs, if I was an MSP, I'd be getting up to speed on the virtues and the drawbacks of AI and which applications are being, being tested, and what are the results of that testing, and which ones are creating more problems and which ones are are containable. But it's a tremendous opportunity when you're talking to a guy who learned to research the law in a library with paper books. And when I first went to
Oof.
law school, it was an honors violation to use computer-aided research without permission, mainly because it was so expensive. Unless you had a very well-funded school, you go and leave that terminal on overnight when you leave the library and forget. You can generate a big bill. But it's like any other tool, whether you're doing it in paper books or you're doing it online, you have to know how to use your tool, and you need to know your tool's limitations. And I don't have to tell you, and we spoke about this in August when we were speaking at the conference in Dallas, Texas. There's been too many examples of lawyers throughout the country, even the federal courts, using AI early. And, it's commendable that they're trying to stay up to speed. But if you don't know how the tool works, then you wind up in situations like we saw in Texas and New York, where briefs were filed and cases were there. The cases were spot on. The issues, the problem was they
They
weren't
weren't
real.
real. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, One of the things that's kind of shocked me getting into the AI world is there are already laws dealing with AI usage. They seem to be primarily in the space of employment, in terms of hiring, firing, promoting people. But there's already laws out there. So I think it's something where, as companies increasingly go, okay, we have to use AI to stay on the ball, they're really going to have to start running this through attorneys to say, okay, where can we do this? What are the rules and the regulations surrounding it? Because I feel like right now it's companies view it AI as just this magic box, right? Where you,
Right.
you put in anything and out pops magic. But it's going to be a lot more regulated. I think especially as it starts taking away jobs, they're really going to start cracking down on all of this AI. So it's something where MSPs need to keep up to speed with this stuff so they can talk to their clients. They also need to start looking at the contractual kind of liability issues surrounding AI, because it's going to be an interesting field
Well,
to
the
be a part of.
MSPs they've got to confront something. They're going to be confronting it more and more frequently. And the issue isn't tomorrow's issue, it's yesterday's issue. The intersection between personal use of AI and data in the digital world and business use is being blurred, because we all have many, many devices. They're not exclusive devices. You have your bring your own device, and people are using the personal and the business. It's on the same platform. So you're going to see more laws develop that are going to affect where you store your data, how you use your data. And I'll give you a simple example. In Germany now, if you have a relationship and you break up, and I
Mhm.
have 2,000 pictures of the person that was in a relationship, I have to provide those pictures to the person, and I have to delete them from whatever device I have. So as we go down this road, and I have 3 or 4 devices sitting on my desk in front of me right now. And as they cross-pollinate more and more and more, as the devices get smaller and smarter, from
Mhm.
your glasses to your smartphone and your earpieces and in your car and in your house and everything else, you're going to cross-pollinate. And so then when the subpoena comes, or when the compliance comes, the personal side sometimes is going to require you to go over to the business side and handle data in a certain way. a manner that we never really contemplated. So the MSP task, I think it's a great opportunity because there'll be no aspect of business's life where you will be able to say that there isn't an entree into the digital world, and there'll be no aspect that the MSP won't have an opportunity to oversee. And that to me is opportunity, and opportunity means business, and business means profits.
Very good. Very good. All right, let's talk about, we've talked about this in the past. Now we're going to have to define these terms. There's a big question mark in the MSP community around lawsuits. I call them claims. That's the insurance word for it. Slightly different. You were talking about mediation prior to litigation or arbitration, each side splitting costs. So real briefly, tell me, what is mediation, what is arbitration, and why you think that particular setup is a good idea moving forward.
So I'm a big fan of mediation from a business person's standpoint because it's often simple. It's simple in the sense that you don't have witnesses, you don't have the rules of evidence that apply, you don't take a lot of discovery. As you know, once you get into discovery, lawyers can't help themselves. They want everything, and your firstborn child, Rumpelstiltskin, has nothing to do with the dispute at hand. You get into mediation, you have business-minded people, often with phenomenal prior experience in the business world and in the litigation world in the courtroom. They've seen it all, and they have great. And this is part of their training. Part of it is it's innate. Some of it you can't train, but part of it is their training. In Delaware, for example, they have tremendous training, ongoing training for just not only base mediators, but for advanced mediators. They get the parties in the room, and for lack of a better phrase, engage in shuttle diplomacy, and they try to look at the practical aspects of one side's view or another, what the available resources are, and they try to bring them to some sort of compromise to settle. Typically, you split the cost of the mediator. It's very efficient. It's a lot more user-friendly because you're not caught up in an increasingly slower and busy and costly court system. So I like mediating.
So is it kind of like my two sons have a dispute, the mediator's like going to mom, right? Where mom says, all right, I'm going to hear you guys both out. Let's come to like a nice mutual understanding. Everybody, play nice, hug it out. We'll move forward. Everybody's still happy. Is that kind of an easy way?
That's exactly right. That's a great way to describe it, because mom's not going to prefer one son or daughter over another. They're going to find a way to keep that bridge intact and bring them back to a compromise, shake hands, and go on their way, whatever the problem is, to resolve it. Arbitration, I liken to a mini trial. It isn't necessarily faster. It should be. It often is faster than trial. It isn't necessarily cheaper, but it often is cheaper than trial, and more compact and shorter, and it's binding, right? So you have a lot greater limit on your ability to appeal into different and higher places than you do and have a subsequent review if you don't like the ruling than you do in court. And we all know what courts are. I mean, you have thousands of legal shows on television. While exaggerated, what's not exaggerated is that it takes time, it takes an emotional toll, and it costs a lot of money. I think I've seen hourly rates now surpass $1,400 an hour in some sophisticated firms and businesses. And I always say, forget about the extreme examples. The average closely held business with even $6 million of revenue and the standard margins that we all know apply in the IT sector. I always ask, can anybody in the room tell me whether they think that it wouldn't impact their business and their balance sheet in any given year that they put out $50,000 towards litigation before they even get to the courtroom. It's not,
Yeah.
it sounds, it is a lot of money, but it could be a lot more. So mediation, I'm a big fan of mediation. It's one form of alternative dispute resolution, as they call it. But that's where I would want to go first every single time if I were a small business owner.
Now, what about, say, like a kind of the example we were always given was mediation for general disputes, right? So MSP and a client, they're having a dispute over, how long it should take a particular issue to be resolved, right? Or how quickly they respond to a trouble ticket, right? So instead of, hey, just severing the relationship, it's like, hey, let's go to mediation. We'll have quote unquote mom kind of hash it out. But what about, say, like arbitration for fee disputes, right? Where, hey,
Well,
it's
I would still go to mediation for a fee dispute first. I would always go to
okay.
mediation. Use your example. If you're arguing over the time it takes to clear a ticket, it's a relational issue that should be handled purely at business to business level. Because
Okay.
there's a disconnect between expectations, and that should be resolved there. Because I don't know, I don't know what damages you would be looking at. I guess if you were slow on the uptake to fix problems, it could cost the business money. But those are the fundamentals. And my view always is, whether it's butcher, baker, candlestick maker, lawyers, or MSPs,
Mhm.
those kinds of things should be worked out business to business.
Good. I like that. All right, let's talk about compliance with applicable data privacy laws, because this is something that I really like. Data privacy law, I find it super fascinating, but oh my God, is it hard to keep track of this stuff? I mean, I've written books on this. I'm trying to write my 7th book right now for MSPs, which has like the data privacy law. It's just kind of a brief overview of what's in all these, but they keep changing. And I think that's a really good place for MSPs to start limiting their liability, because they're not data privacy attorneys. So tell me, what are your thoughts on dealing with compliance with data privacy laws within these contracts? What's your take on that?
Well, an MSP always has to know up front what standards are their services going to have to adhere to. That goes without saying. Could be more, could be less. The problem with data privacy, as you know, is that you get these GDPR like European laws, and they're different in all 50 states.
Yeah.
And for example, some are more restrictive than others and continuing to get more restrictive. California is very, very tough, for example. And I'm not speaking to whether it makes sense, doesn't make sense, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. I'm just saying it's hard to comply and they're complicated. Arizona is another state that's very difficult for clients. But if you're an MSP and you're doing business in multiple states, then you're going to have to make some effort at the base level. The first line of defense, I think, a friend of mine who's got a dedicated to providing cybersecurity services, the first line of defense is buttoning up, making sure you're doing everything you can to prevent the breach, the hack, the data loss, the ransom, whatever it happens to be. And we've talked about a variety of those things that has to do with your procedures of the customer's employees, has to do with the procedures and training of the MSP's employees. That's the first line of defense, because it's unrealistic to think that the MSP is going to be able to learn to a T and get really wise and understand all the various data privacy laws, commercial and consumer, and all the nuances. You can't afford to pay an attorney or insurance expert like Joe Brunsman. Every time you turn around, you want to know what the current privacy laws are. So the first line of defense is the security, and then how do you deal with it in a contract? just like we had talked about, it's the same thing. You have to limit your liability to the things you can control, balance it with the cost of the services that you're providing, looking at the revenue, and get exclusions for the things you can't control. I always say it's easy. Exclude your liability for other people's behavior. Behavior that you
Yeah.
can't control. It's one way of looking at it.
So, do you think that MSPs should be like affirmatively stating to their clients, like, hey, we'll do our best to keep you safe, right? But we're not data privacy attorneys. We highly recommend Mr. or Mrs. Client that you know, go out to a data privacy attorney to research your own particular obligations. Do you think MSP should do that, or is it just kind of that's the
Well, I don't know.
responsibility of the business?
It depends on the individual transaction and relationship. I mean, small businesses are like MSPs. The SMBs are like are no different than MSPs or any other business. You know, as an attorney, I never want to provide a solution if I can help it, by just getting it off my desk by saying, go hire a professional to tell you whether you've got issues or you don't. But I think that you can say, make sure you have protocols in place. Make sure you provide adequate training. And there are services out there. HIPAA is a good example. So if you have a BAA and you're wondering whether you have to sign a BAA and you're wondering what compliance or what's reasonable and not reasonable, I'm not going to endorse any, but there are services out there that you can get that are very, very reasonable to the bottom line and to the budget that can help you navigate that compliance. So that's what I would say. I would say, make sure you've got adequate training in place, and the MSPs know they can provide the training, some of them, or they can provide recommendations to third parties who can provide the training. And as you know, Joe, there's a tremendous amount of information. You have to sift through it so that you're getting good information. Tremendous free information available out there, and especially through trade groups and things like that.
Very good. Very good. All right, Danny, thank you for your sage advice on this fine evening. Let me think. People will obviously be able to find you. They'll just look on the background there. They'll know how to get a hold of you. I would urge everybody moving forward, the liability landscape for MSPs is changing, right? I think your first line of defense when something pops off, it's going to be your contracts. And so I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody post on Reddit, hey, could somebody share their MSA? Could somebody share an SLA? I can't tell you how many times I've asked an MSP, hey, can I see your MSA? Right? Can I see your SLA? And it's got a venue of dispute. And that MSP is not even in that state. And I'm like, hey, you're in Florida. What are you doing going to North Carolina for court? And they're like, oh, I never read that far.
I think that's good advice. Everybody in Main Street, no matter what state you're in, somebody knows of a lawyer, or there's a lot of competent, there are a lot of, I know I've been doing this for 35 years. There's a lot of competent people out there like yourself who aren't necessarily lawyers, who can provide guidance on the big picture, what things they should be concerned with without giving legal advice. And there's a lot of competent lawyers. I'm a big fan of the small business lawyer. And I think every MSP should find a business lawyer that they can count on and introduce them to their business and have them do a mechanical review of what contracts that they're signing or putting out there. Just as you take your car in for a tune-up, your business is no different, no matter what business you have. I think you should always look to see, who do I need to help me ensure that I've got the fundamentals in place. Insurance is an easy one. Somebody like you can tell people in 30 minutes to an hour, looking at a policy and the coverage and the exclusions, more than they can get sitting in a 3-day seminar or or statement against interest, better than probably most lawyers can do, because it's the fundamental nuts and bolts where the rubber meets the road, and not everybody's well versed in insurance, and you have to find people that that have that in the wheelhouse. A good place to start is with somebody in the insurance field, because you've got insurance. There's no question about that. You got to have it, like yourself,
Mm.
who also understands the risk management and from an insurance perspective. That's a good place to start, because when you're talking about insurance and insuring liabilities, it's kind of easy to turn and do a page turner and look at the contract and say, what are the big protections that I've got that I'm looking to insure against? So to
Yeah.
me, two things come together.
Now I will let me toot your horn here real fast. Um, I am a big proponent of, like, yes, I do think, the general small business attorney is a phenomenal resource.
Mhm.
In my view, I'm like, these MSAs, the SLAs, the risks that are occurring within the MSP community. I'm a big proponent of, yes, you should have your business attorney. If you're an MSP, and I hand this out to people all the time, I'm like, there's only a couple businesses I would use, and you're on that list. There's only a couple businesses I would use to actually write an MSA for me or review my MSA, because it's so technical. And I feel like, I mean, your background, you've obviously worked with a bunch of MSPs as well. It's like those are very specific risks, right? To be able to talk to an MSP and say, we were talking about mediation and arbitration, right? It's okay. When do you trigger that? When do you not trigger that?
Right.
Like I have Westlaw, which is legal software. I can find an MSA template on my Westlaw software. I don't give it out because I'm like, there's too many specificities, I think, within the MSP community, where I think that
Okay.
people really need to say, okay, this is my general business attorney. Great. I want a specialist, right? Like somebody who actually knows MSPs, who's done this before, to write my MSA. That's what I tell people, right? Is, hey, you need a liability waiver? Go to your general business attorney, right? Make sure he's up to speed. He can get that for you. It's very state specific. There you go. If you need like a technical document, I'm a big proponent of just go to the experts, right? Hey, maybe it'll
Mhm.
cost you a little bit more. That's the price you pay for expertise. And so that's why, everybody listening, I have Danny on my list of recommended attorneys.
Well, and you're very kind to say that, but the purpose of our fireside chat is to talk about how we can help those business owners. There are very few lawyers that one of their silos happens to be uh, a deep dive into the MSP world, like my firm and my colleagues are. But there are
Mm.
a lot of, what I'm suggesting is you start with the fundamentals, especially if you're a startup, especially if you're a very small, closely held family business. You start with the fundamentals, and then so the people that you're already using should be able, a general practitioner anywhere in the world who's doing business contracts should be able to issue spot and help with those fundamentals. I get the fundamentals in place, see what's missing first, and then
Mm.
you can seek out especially somebody who's got a specialty or a lot of experience in a particular area to try to help you with that. And start with the fundamentals. Get for your BAA. Not everyone's going to be able to go to an attorney and say, this is what I need drafted or reviewed, but there are compliance services, just using that as an example, who can help you with those things fundamentally. I've seen insurance brokers before. If you look at uh, some of the contracts, that some of the things that they have, there are provisions in there that should cause somebody to raise their head up from the desk and say, okay, I don't have a contract. I'm going to need to do that so I don't have the breach or default under my policy. Also, it'll require certain things. And the simple one is your coverage. If you cover a thing, the question then becomes in the contract, it's issue spotting. How have you addressed that thing that you're now seeking coverage for in your contract? So I would start there, but then I agree with you. You always want everybody, if they can find the person, and if they can And if it fits their budget, they should try to do the best for the medical, or nobody wants to go to the worst surgeon, they want to go to the best surgeon. But
Yep.
always typically you start with your general practitioner, right? To try
Sage
and
advice.
diagnose it. I really enjoyed this, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for having me, Danny. Well, I guess thanks for talking to me again. Always a pleasure. I always learn stuff. Hopefully the MSP community, they'll get one or two little things out of this. It's going to help them move forward. Coming up here in the new year, liability is not the most fun topic, but I think as the MSP community starts maturing and these business owners realize, hey, there's more risk here, the world's getting more complicated, it's just something they got to do. So, been a pleasure, Danny. Take it
All
easy.
right.
We'll
Till
chat
next
again.
time, fair winds and following seas.
Always.